Hello and welcome to Autistic Radio. We're here every Sunday with the 555, sponsored by coldpack.co.uk. If you're a practitioner needing a cryotherapy product, use of the website coldpack.co.uk enables us here at Autistic Radio through their sponsorship. So thank you to them and thank you to you being their customer. Now, Harry, do we start as usual with the poem?
Yes, I do, Jules. Hello, everyone. This is Harry's Facebook for Sunday, the 21st of June 2026, which is Father's Day in the UK. And this is where we go through the Facebook posts on our Autistic Radio page. And as always, we start with some poetry. And the poem's called Destiny Chain, and it's been written by myself some years ago, 2001. Your destiny is calling for the sunshine to rise upon your soul to make you feel alive once more. The sunshine brings out the blue sky, which colours your mood from the grey. The blue sky shows you the puffy white clouds, which introduces the comfort into your heart. The white clouds temporarily cover the sun to keep you in sense of reality. What's your thoughts?
That's so simple, but it feels really, really deep. There's a lot going on in there.
What it is, from what I remember, and I think a lot of my poetry is like that actually, it's one of those middle of the night things, but it's taken from a memory, but not from so long ago to that time where I put it on paper. I used to go to a walking group. It was actually an autistic specific walking group through the Strathclyde Autistic Society in Glasgow. And it was like one Sunday a month. And there was a lot of walks, of course. It was done during the summer months. And sometimes, thankfully, it was nice days. And sometimes when we were out, walking, out within, away from civilization, like we went out of the city, we went out of a town, in fields, one of those walks that's in the countryside, maybe a big park. And just the sights and sounds just capture. And I always seem to hold on to that. And sometimes I grab out, or at least I used to grab a pen, paper, and write it at the time. But sometimes I didn't have any with me, so I'd save it till later, or it'd just come back later on because I didn't have a lot to occupy me years ago like I do today. So it's just basically painting a picture and the feeling that I had at the time in terms of how such a nice day or how such a nice scene and environment can lift your spirits, but also keep you grounded as well.
I'm really interested in this from the part of the visuals. I think the simplicity of the words that make the visuals work so that you can actually look up on that sky and see those things happening. As you read the poem, you can see them, you can create that visual. And then the metaphor that it feels to me, that it conveys, is something about holding on, that there is a place in the future where this will pass, the mood will change, There's a contrast between clouds of mood and blue sky of good place, good feeling, good mental health. And this visualization, this looking into the clouds in this beautiful day sky, it holds a metaphor for getting through a rough patch, and realizing that the rough patch as a contrast is necessary. So when the white clouds are temporarily covering the sun, it keeps you in a sense of reality or proportion. The blue sky shows you the puffy white clouds. If it wasn't for the contrast of the blue, the deepness of that you wouldn't see them, and then those clouds are the ones that get. So there's lots of feelings from me in the metaphor of having hope, destiny being a hope, and the natural scene being a way of holding that and uplifting your own spirits by imagining the scene and imagining that feeling of being in that beautiful place with the summer's day and the clouds in the sky.
And becoming the scene. The best of poetry is when we can forget ourselves and become it. But of course, we are the ones who commit it down on paper. Um, Sometimes when I write, I get a bit confused about, which person I am. So I'm going to ask Harry, your destiny. Uh, is that addressed to people in general, or is that addressed to a person, or is that the you we sometimes use when we're talking about ourselves as a, general? Uh, so I, I can't think of the words just now for that kind of perspective. But I do see the undercurrent of the person underneath all this is the grey. That grey is coming from somewhere. Maybe it was just the weather uh, for a brief moment of time, and it's gone now because sunshine's brought out the blue sky. But your destiny and your soul, who's being addressed here, Harry?
It's basically myself and sharing that description, because I had that word or that phrase, colour my mood from the grey, for a while before putting it into a poem. It's because there's many times where, and still is, serious and overthinking and planning, and it's not all bad, it's just serious and sometimes a bit maybe beige rather than grey. So sometimes things, even though I kind of want it and I sort of expect it, it always takes me by surprise when something beautiful happens, like being out somewhere and it's just nice, like the blue sky, which you see a lot, but sometimes not often enough. It's basically just sharing experience I felt while I was walking with a Sunday walking group, and how that lifted me from maybe earlier that day where I was feeling a bit, don't really want to get out of bed. I'm going out of bed early to go up and meet people in Glasgow. I'm not feeling so good. Or the last couple of days before that, I was just dealing with things because it was still quite early, in my autism diagnosis or identity. So there's still a lot of questions going on. So it's just a kind of journey.
Yeah, I like that. The grey can almost be like that shadow coming over you, or the clouds appearing, and it's yourself doing it. Because I've got this habit as well when I'm writing of using words like your, and I'm addressing everyone or a particular person, but I'm really talking about myself. It's a strange thing. Uh, and I think grey gets a bad press. I really like that colour, you know what I mean? But in this situation, it's being used as a contrast, yes.
Well, I use the you as I know it sounds kind of strange. Is like I don't want to just talk about me. There are some poetry maybe that I have done so because it's like really deep and I need to like, get it out. But sometimes when it's something positive, I just want to share this and talk about other people. So when people are reading it, it's like it's not about me, about my experience. It's all about something you may experience as well. Maybe that's what self-consciously, but I like to write that way so it just feels like I'm sharing rather than just telling.
Yeah, it might sound a wee bit hippie, but you've become one with everything. You could say I, but you said you, and suddenly everyone else is included, which is just great.
I'm just starting to realise what's happened and what you've introduced to us, Harry. A few weeks ago, months ago now, you suggested the idea that we started with a poem occasionally. And we've had all these different poems, mostly from the group, the different members of the group, and yourself, and ones you've picked up here and there. And I've ended up in university. You've changed this whole format to this lovely thing where we have this comparative literature class for a few minutes discussing a poem that's usually got something to do with autism. I think this is really wonderful what you've managed to create in my life for me. Thank you really very much.
There's a thing called the Stendhal syndrome, which is when you're overcome by the sheer beauty and experience of what you're going through, which I heard the term long before I was diagnosed, because there was a Dario Argento film called that. But a friend of mine told me he was on a bus one day and he just looked out, and the whole experience of what he was seeing was just it was just so much. It was just so much that he nearly passed out. And I think that's the sort of autism overwhelming thing.
There's another thing called Jerusalem syndrome that used to take over people who visited Jerusalem for the first time. The overwhelm.
Just to go in a bit deeper, I can remember when I used to write stories as escapism in the past. I may have mentioned it before. Where, because I was getting picked on in school and people thought I was strange, and not all the time, but I always felt kind of sort of the outsider of the so-called normal society. Although when you get older, you realise that never really existed. It just appeared to exist, just the way my own perspective. But when I was introduced to poetry, it was just something that was so more effective and it could be done so short. And when you read it to yourself and you share it with others, it just it always seems to, I suppose, probably the same as stories. People take it all in different ways because everybody's got their different view on what they're hearing or reading. And I'm just glad I discovered their poetry. It was like a writers group, and it was actually a poet called Alistair Patterson from Ayr who was doing this creative writing group. It wasn't a class, it was a group. It was one of those groups for the community. There was no charge or anything. It was like council funded, and he did it for a number of years. I think he got funded for so long, and then moved on. But there was things as well as retreats. There was, I remember, a weekend away next to Loch Fyne, Tarbert, and Argyll and Bute, Scotland. And that was a great weekend away where we were kind of sharing poems, in the sort of kind of house we were in, and we'd go out and have a walk about, and even though the weather wasn't great, there was still a lot of inspiration. It's just the journey from poetry I just find so interesting, and I even parked it for a while. And I've only started to share it more again because it was just an idea that I had after sharing, poetry from others and hearing from others as well, and some funny, some quite deep and sad, and some so inspirational. It's just so amazing how poetry can be so impactful. I'm just glad that I can use that as a sort of way of communicating if I'm feeling difficult to express feelings in other ways.
It's very valuable finding that kind of space, or creating or opening up that kind of space for you to be that kind of person. I've been to a few creative writing things over the years. I've never enjoyed any of them until recently because the space is more relaxed and open, it's autistic based, and I don't have to write anything there. I'm just in the space of creative writing. I can listen to other people be that, or I can be inspired enough to maybe try and do it myself. Um, but yeah, it can. Yeah, a lot of these things can be a wee bit. What's the word I'm looking for? Intimidating, and we think it's not our world. And it's very important if someone can open up that world for you.
Gia, can you repeat, if you can, what you were talking about earlier on? Because obviously we're interrupted. If you're able to, of course.
Yeah, what I was saying is there's this thing called the Stendhal syndrome, which I heard of first from a Dario Argento film, and it's a feeling when you're experiencing the beauty of your surroundings that it actually has a physical effect on you, dizziness and euphoria and being overcome. And a friend of mine who hasn't got autism said he was on a bus one day and he looked out the window and it was just, he just felt that the world that he was looking at was just so incredible and beautiful that he actually passed out because of it. And I mean, whether that's, and he didn't have autism, but whether we have some of that syndrome when we get overcome by the surroundings that we're in.
Yes, I think autism-wise, we've talked about, the senses. The senses is more amplified and stronger. So maybe we're taking it more than neurotypical. And because I do know that, as the poem says, and as we've just kind of talked about, is it's amazing how things like that can just capture you. And sometimes as simple as things, like I'm walking, I still got a memory of it. I still haven't done a poem about it. It just came actually because I'm talking about it. Is when I used to kind of walk, at winter, and when it's dark, early morning, going for the train or whatever, and the way that, and because it's frosty, it was the way that the pavement would kind of sparkle. It's like stars. Because of the street lights or other lights that are there, just because it's the particles or whatever. I used to find that incredibly beautiful, and well, I could stand or I could walk up and down here and just look at this for a wee while rather than going where I'm actually going. So I can totally get what you're talking about, Gina.
I used to see that in the car windscreen, and the reason I saw it was very much the life I had the last decade when I had my dog and I was walking the dog regularly. That gave me this kind of creative space to just relax, slow down, and bear witness to things. And suddenly I was seeing things, I didn't usually focus upon. And that was because of entertaining it in this situation with walking the dog. So, again, find these spaces if you can to make these things happen.
I've often said I don't wear earphones, headphones, noise cancelling, because where I am, I have to feel the space around me. And when you're in a city, you've usually the space around you is probably not more than 60 or 70, 100 feet wide because you've got buildings on either side. But when you go out in the country and you try and fill that space and you just work your way around the trees and you're just carrying on going and going, when you're out in the countryside, the space that you can feel that you're inhabiting, that you're part of is, I don't get overwhelmed by it, but I just absolutely like that. And the sounds, the way sounds operate when you're in that environment, because there's no traffic and you can hear birds singing. And I mean, every so often you might even catch sight of a deer or something. I mean, being out in the countryside and being out in that space is just fantastic.
I'm thinking of a classic scene in a movie, and I can't remember the title of the movie, but Claire Grogan's in it, and she and the star of the movie are lying flat on the ground looking up at the sky, as young people do. As GR has reminded me, it's Gregory's girl. Sometimes we get these blocks in the most obvious things.
The next post is from that spicy autistic femme, who's a blogger, autistic-led, neurodivergent insights with bite, unmasking, unlearning, reclaiming, late diagnosed, burnout, self-understanding, offering spicy truths, tender support, and real talk for neurodivergent folks. And they've shared a post from Rachel's Doodles and More, who is an autistic artist. And it says, everyone's panicking about so many autistic kids these days. But here's the thing. I'm autistic, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 28. I was one of those kids. You just didn't call it autism. You called it weird. You called it difficult. You called it shy, dramatic, awkward, or rude. You bullied us. You punished us. You told us to try harder. We were always here. You just didn't know what we were. What's people's thoughts?
I think we're sort of lucky that we have our diagnoses and we know who we are, but equally there are times when the world doesn't seem to understand that, and we've always been here and we always will be here. So it's I when I go out, I wear a sunflower lanyard and a I am autistic card to so people can see that I'm out and about, and I'm happy to discuss autism with anyone.
I was in a autistic reading group this week, and the subject came up of, overdiagnosis, and people were referring to it in a negative way. It's like an accusation levied by certain political forces. But I was kind of struck by the idea of who actually was doing the diagnosis, and why, if there is overdiagnosis, who did that? It was obviously professionals who sign off our diagnosis. So I've asked this question before and I did get a good answer. It's like something happened about 14, 15 years ago where they changed the assessments and suddenly these diagnoses were appearing a lot more. But you wonder sometimes whether there's a reason why there may be overdiagnosis and it's not a negative thing. It's a strange thought. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly.
I'd like to speak directly to the numbers in diagnosis. I think you are correct. It is a political football, but it's not based on actual statistics or numbers. It's based on feelings. What there are now is more diagnoses, more groups of people that are seen to be a group that needs to be recognised as existing, that have asimilarities to each other, and that's what medicine does. It puts people in groups, it classifies people. So it's not over-diagnosing, it's creating new categories to be understood. Now, what people are socially complaining about is the feeling that some people are using their mental health to shirk their responsibilities in society. That's basically what the right wing feel, that there are a group of people who are not playing the game by the rules that everyone else is. And it's the usual politics, divisive. We've created new diagnoses over the last few years, and we've decided to give people the opportunity to look on the scale and find out if they are somebody that would be diagnosed. And people have taken up that opportunity to find out. More and more people have decided that they have realised they are neurodivergent, and they want somebody to stand in a white coat and say to them, yes, I validate that. Now, personally, I see the younger generation just classifying themselves, realising, taking it on as an identity, being comfortable with it as an identity, being much more open to difference between different kinds of people, and seeing neurodivergence and just say, yeah, so what? And when I speak to very, young teens and young 20s, it's very so what. When I speak to autistic people in their 40s and 50s, it's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely, Jules. Self-diagnosis, self-identity has certainly ruffled feathers. It's all about control, I think, and division, of course. That's what a lot of the politics do, especially right wing. Keep people separated, let people fight against each other. This sort of every person for themselves, sort of self-survival, and be a part of this hierarchy. I think what's winding up a lot of people is they can't put certain individuals into boxes because of the refusal to do so. And the sort of weapon they use is, oh, you're just saying that because you don't want to be part of normal society. For instance, get a job and work for society, be part of society. You want to be different. You want to shirk away from your responsibility. You want to be treated different, special. And it's not. I can't say it for everybody, of course not. But many people just want to be respected. Because for many years, well, I'll say myself, now in my mid-40s, and because the way my life has been, I haven't had much employment. And when you're grown up in a working class environment, and even though there's been understanding, from my parents that are working class, my siblings, etc., you still feel this sort of outsider this different outsider, and I felt guilty. They would say, without being bad, like, oh, it's okay, you're not well, you're a special case. But I do hear the same people criticising other people in society of not being part of the normal way things should be. Or there's a family I know, there's someone I know it's never worked and all that sort of thing. Someone that dresses a certain way, someone that does something with their hair, and people that don't identify with the male and female thing, that does wind a lot of people up, rightly or wrongly, because of the lack of understanding. And there's people within that are autistic too, and they're battling a lot. But I like what Jules has said, and I've seen it. I think we've spoke to people about it. But I remember Jules saying that he's spoken to a lot of younger people that's like, I, me, so what? It's a bit more freer. It's more, this is me. How dare you judge me? I like who I am. And even though they're fighting a big battle, it's like it's a bit more free than how I felt when I was in my 20s. I was lucky enough to be diagnosed earlier than a lot of people, within my age. But it was a different time and a different language and a different way that it was looked at, as we've all spoken about before. So I'm always for the fight back, because as we know, there's certain elements of society, establishment, however you want to call it, that always wants to put you in your place according to them.
Here, Alice, let me tell you this story, Ray, just before, I know you're in, let me just say what happened recently. My wife is in New Zealand, and somebody has noticed she's different and said, where are you from? She said, I come from near Edinburgh. The lady said, oh, I would love to visit and travel that far, but it's so expensive. And my wife said, well, my husband deals with these sort of things, and he's quite keen to get very good prices and things. And at that point, my daughter joins. My daughter's in her 30s, and and she just joins just at the time, and my daughter's very quick-brained. Just at the time when the lady says, well, I wish I had something like your husband has. To which my daughter says quickly, what, autism? And laughing and smiling, and my daughter's laughing and smiling, and my wife's laughing and smiling, and the lady behind is laughing and smiling, and the people in the queue and around the thing all see the funny side of, yes, there's this person who has this special thing that they've done this thing, they are able to do this thing that we can't do, and we're all laughing, and yes, it is funny to say it's autistic. In lots of ways in my life, I get entirely included within things. It's not seen as a slur. We can very easily buy into the idea that keeps us down, that everybody is shitting on us, but they really are not. We have lots and lots of allies out there and people who like the idea of autistic people. It's not all the fucking doom and gloom that people repeatedly read and spiral into in social media. I am respected as an autistic man in my community, out as an autistic man. It's not all shit.
I think it will always be political, because identification challenges the power structures. If we think about the parallel perhaps with being left-wing or socialist, there was a time when that wasn't possible. It had to be created. People had to diagnose it to a certain extent so that you could be that person that you were. So I see it now as a kind of evolution into a way of identifying in this world. And it is political, and it will be used politically by those who are the enemies of it. Because it's not just a lifestyle thing, I think I'm trying to say, because often when I read these things, I think people are going for a lifestyle option, which at root is a political gesture, you know, and I don't want to live politically all the time, but I do realise that our choices are political because we're within a society, the polis. So, yeah, that's it.
I feel sorry for anyone who's looking for work these days, because if you haven't got a job, there's this automatic thing that you're deficient in some way anyway, or you're not doing something. And I remember before my really bad mental crash 14 years ago, I was applying for 35 to 50 jobs a month, and you just don't get a response. And I don't think it's changed from what I've read, which you could argue is anecdotal, but from what I've read, it's just the same, if not harder. And that's why things like the Equality Act and Disability Discrimination Act are important for people like us. And to actually lose those would be quite detrimental.
I've got a couple of observations to make there, because I think they slightly differ from where you are, GR. I don't think it's changed much. I think that the way we are programmed in our politics is to be quite down on people who are not working conventionally. I think it's really not an option. It's so ingrained in society. So I could say that even when I left school in 1981 and there were 4 million unemployed people, people did try to shame people for being unemployed when it was completely obvious that there was a structural crisis in our country and whole industries were closed down and there were areas with 80% unemployment. Okay, and they still tried in the press to say that people were shirking or they were claiming things that they shouldn't. And it has never changed. There's always been people who want to, and it works, as Harry said, on the working classes. You know, I don't think I'm working class really. I think I come from working class backgrounds, and my parents managed to get to working class, and that was a step up from where they were born, which was destitution. So I kind of am in a never ground. So I don't have the shame of not working. So when I was young, and I didn't have the shame, and I don't think anybody should have shame of not working, of not fitting into society. You know, society is here for you to have a niche in any way you can. And if you cannot find a job and you are 40 times, stop doing it. Stop banging your head against a brick wall and rethink things. You know, work out how to live a frugal life on benefits with a little bit on the side, some kind of hustle that might then lead into something. And then only apply for the things that you really think might work for you. Because banging your head against a brick wall, sending hundreds of CVs instead of one or two really good, well thought out ones is not going to work. You know, release yourself from something that is not going to, it's wasted effort, and use that time productively for yourself, either for your mental health or for finding a niche and finding a skill and using it and finding an opportunity, because only doing things leads to other things. You know, I think it's performative, a lot of this applying. Stop doing it.
Yeah, unfortunately, because I wasn't on any sick or disability benefits back then, and you had to apply for a certain number of jobs, and there were all sorts of. I even ended up on. I think you had to be unemployed for a certain amount of time to go on the work program, and I actually forced the job centre to put me on the work program because I felt I needed that extra help, and that was a really big mistake. They were even more despotic than the job centre, and it wasn't. The system didn't feel like it was helping me to find work, but like you say, it's just forcing you to do things again and again and again that fail every time, and then you're supposed to feel like you're making progress in that way. And like you say, if you've got certain talents and skills, if like I said one time, I wanted to work with maps, and the job centre told me that was a complete waste of time because those jobs didn't exist. And I'd just come out of 9 years ordnance survey, and I got a job at Southampton City Council because I knew about maps. And then I got a job with a surveying company because I knew about maps. So it did work. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's the system is stacked against you, to be honest.
I've got an interview tomorrow where I'm compiling a CV. I'm going to use the experience to compile what I call an autistic CV. I'm going to go over my entire history as a employee or my job record and interpret it from this perspective. And what we were saying earlier, Jules was saying earlier, say about shaming, you know, that happened because we had no identity to deflect the shaming and blaming, you know. And it was very important what Joe says about it was a breakdown in the society at that point, you know, it was a malfunctioning system. But within that, there are discoveries to be made, obviously, because if you don't fully believe in that system, then, you know, you have options, you have a way of figuring out. But I'm not going to deny people the fact that there were pressures put on them. Yeah, there's definitely, when you're in the system and can't escape it, pressures are put on you. So it's quite helpful that what this post was saying about identity. And I think it is a political identity.
Yes. You know, going back to the post, you know, it's talking about how you were treated as a child, as a kid. You were treated as a problem. You were treated as there was some sort of malfunction, you know, for want of a better term, you know, not to fit in. And now we know the reason why, and it's not that there's anything wrong with you, it's just that you're different, and because of the system that was put in at the time, even though I've been told things have improved, is you end up in a bad way because you felt that you were a problem. And what we've been talking about, you know, the last while here is obviously when it's like as an adult and how you feel as an adult if you're not in employment. But what all of us have been saying, you know, and Jules talking about, you know, is this inspirational? Just like, just don't feel you're being forced. I know there's certain circumstances that it may be more difficult than others, but I'm certainly inspired, and I think the confidence that I have now is built from what Jules has said about not telling you stop being bad, but basically saying you don't need to feel bad about not being in employment or being the so-called normal way, because society is not, it's all over the place. And it's not, if you don't fit in, it doesn't mean that you're in the wrong. It means that society can't fit you in. And I don't mean, society is not inclusive enough. Not open enough. And the thing about the working class, in fact, while I'm on that, I know of an autistic person who's been working all their life and they hate the working class system in this country because of what we've talked about. It's like that's sort of not just the working class system, but the whole class system. It's like there's been experiences where the working class have shunned or made comments because they've worked in a certain industry or they work in a certain way that isn't perceived as being a trade or being a worthy trade. And all that has actually been done politically and been forced because a lot of classes fight back against being, oppressed and all that. But sometimes they do it to their own. So yeah, there's a lot of things that can be changed, but there's always inspiration. And that's what I like about our conversations. There's always either a word or a story that's inspirational just to remind ourselves, or to remind me, I'll talk about myself, to remind me that not to feel that guilt. And I'm glad to say that I don't feel that guilt as much as I used to. I'm more proud of myself than I've ever been. And that's because I've spoken to other autistic people with their experiences and options that are out there.
Hey Ray, let me and Harry, let me try go through this piece and put it from my point of view. Okay? There are not enough autistic kids these days. We need a higher population of autistic kids. It's good that we're diagnosing people and making up diagnoses to look at kids as individuals so that we can fit their needs. This is a very good thing in a civilized society. I was diagnosed when I was 50 something a few years ago. And up until that point, my privilege didn't really have my privilege was that I was not bullied. I embraced being weird, and I had other people who were weird. So we had a gang of us weird people. So we had a community. We were not singled out and bullied like you guys. So other people exist that have a different autistic experience that's quite positive. We were called difficult, yes, in different circumstances. And you know what? We embraced it and saw ourselves as the antisocials. It was part of our identity. Yes, we were called these things like shy and dramatic and awkward and rude and lots more beside. And that gave us our strength, and that gave us our sense of self and self-worth and identity. Growing up healthily as an autistic person. I understand your sense that you were ignored, and we have been in the background. But in other circumstances, it was the autistic kids at my school that were the successful ones. And geeks didn't get beaten up. They were celebrated. So if you are autistic and you're in the right circumstances, you have every benefit of everybody else in life, and some advantages and some disadvantages.
Is there a suggestion in that, Jules, that the general society possibly neglects the neurodivergent, and that a more, what's the word I'm looking for, open kind of society that is often seen in the private school system is more open to, eccentricity, let's say, or expression, creativity in people. They like somebody with a bit of get up and go, a bit of gumption. That was kind of almost, I can remember it used to exist in the comprehensive school system, but it was kind of machined out, if you see what I mean, because we're kind of a mass production machine. There's less individuality within that system. The negative side of left-wing thinking, where everything is just kind of mechanized into a non-individual society, and everybody becomes homogenized. But yeah, it's just a wee reflection on what you were saying there.
I think to some extent you're correct. However, my schooling was not private schooling. It was better than that. It was an experiment in the 1970s of publicly funded boarding school for a very large number of people. It was 6 boarding schools all built together as a metropolis, a children's metropolis. It was an experiment. It was the largest boarding school in Europe by a Labour government in the 70s. And it was incredibly successful because it had a very high number of neurodivergent kids, though you wouldn't have been called that. They were definitely picked out, and a lot of kids that would otherwise be in care, that kind of thing, from troubled backgrounds, all mingled in. A lot of very working class opportunities and people from difficult backgrounds, but it was modelled in lots of ways on the private school systems. So it had that grammar feel to it, but a very progressive 70s way of teaching.
Yeah, briefly, it sounds like a lot of new thinking. Because when I grew up, I remember there was this term special school, and often it was seen for someone with a disability, but often it was for people who were struggling at school, who were maybe gifted as well. And I wondered where these people went sometimes. But also I knew about care units too, and friends I had who worked in them, and what happened with that kind of education and schooling and progression.
In Norfolk, they went to Wyndham College if they were lucky.
The next post is from Autism Society Philippines, who are a community page. The Autistic Society Philippines envisions a world where Filipinos on the spectrum become the best of their potentials, self-reliant, independent, productive and socially accepted members of an Autism OK Philippines. And the reason I'm sharing this, it's a Father's Day post. Today, we celebrate your strength, love, patience, and unwavering support. Thank you for the sacrifices you make, the lessons you teach, and the encouragement you give every day. To the fathers, grandfathers, stepfathers, and father figures who guide, protect, and inspire their families. Your love helps build a world where every child can grow with confidence and hope. Wishing you a day filled with appreciation, joy, and the love of those who matter most. Happy Father's Day. What's your thoughts?
Can I question the idea of father? Okay, fathers exist. It's part of our society and the structure, but I've often had kind of trouble with it. I mean, I had a father, but what is that concept of a father? A lot of people think it's a strength, a looking after, a head of the household. These are the bits that trouble me at times. Fatherhood. I mean, a father essentially is someone in a relationship who has fathered a child, I suppose. But then there's everything a father does. I'm not going to deny these things and the good relationships families have with each other. So for me, it's this structure of family and father that I ponder sometimes. The absent father, there's a term in psychology, the name of the father, a kind of thing that's always there dominating you, a kind of hierarchy, the head. So these are the thoughts that arise in my mind just now.
Ray, you're deep in there, man. Yeah. There are so many concepts around that word. Absolutely. And I'm with you on that nagging feeling that there's this external concept of father that is there to be some kind of judgment over, etc. Whether that comes from a real person or whether that comes from somebody's concept of God, that overarching authority that sometimes people experience for one reason or another, you name as father. On the lighter end of things, I'm a father to a daughter, and it is a very dynamic relationship that has had its dramas and its beauties, and is stable at the moment. And I am quite happy that I can fit into all the concepts that are out there of proud father, happy father, father that feels that they've provided or managed, and all those other little concepts that people want. But it's so much of an illusion. All of this, what you should be, what you're entitled to, how people should treat you because of your relationship to them. However you're experiencing Father's Day, wherever you are in the world and whenever you listen to this, whether you're estranged from your kids or whatever, it really is all about relationships. And it's not about rights. However, these days that are in our calendars are really good hooks, anchors, excuses, reasons, openings, doorways, gateways, opportunities to hook into relationships that you have neglected. So sending Dad a card, however late, is a good deal on Father's Day.
Yes, there is criticism because of the Father's Day, the sort of commercial side of things. But, yeah, right. I mean, when I'm talking about the commercial side, my own father, even says that, oh, don't worry about me, that's a lot of nonsense, blah, blah, blah. But I gave him a phone call today because I wasn't down, and we had a wee chat, happy Father's Day, and a nice little chat, and that sort of chat, which wasn't about Father's Day in the end, we just stood up talking about other things, but it felt a nice, good connection, and I feel, grateful that I've got that connection with my father, because I know that there's many people who didn't or haven't, and people who obviously their fathers are no longer, have passed. So yeah, it is a good one of those good hooks though, that even though it might be put in for a certain reason, it's certainly a good way of taking an opportunity. Well, thanks everyone. That was a great conversation as always. Good discussion. Good topics. And thanks for all the people that have shared the post that we've talked about today. It was really a worthwhile conversation. Yes, I'm repeating myself. So this is Harry's Facebook for Sunday, the 21st of June, 2026, which is part of the Spectrum Voices conversation, which is here every Sunday, 5:55 p.m. to 7 p.m. UK time. And I look forward to next week. So thanks again, and speak to you soon.